we're appalled, like most people, by what we're seeing and hearing, but I don't think it's going to affect our business. In fact, if anything, I think people will look upon southern Spain as a bit of a safe haven.
So Sean, we're in early March. How is the market behaving here in Marbella at the moment?
Okay, so from our experience, it's been pretty similar to last year, which was our record year. It's been a very successful start to the year. We've actually done the same amount of transactions in January, February, as we did in January, February 2021. The only difference that I've noted is that the average deal value has come down a little bit. I think that's because we're getting fewer people at the very high end coming to us at the moment. Whether they've got other things on their agenda, I don't know. But also there's a lack of stock at that top end. So I think there is a portion of the demand that at the moment is frustrated at that high end, which means they're either waiting for stock to replenish or they're just biding their time. So I think that's why the average deal value has come down a little bit. But certainly in terms of activity, in terms of feet on the ground, in terms of visits, in terms of tours, in terms of property inspections, it's pretty consistent with what we experienced last year, which I think backs up what I suggested was going to happen a few months ago, that there would be an element of pent-up demand post-COVID or towards the end of the COVID cycle that still had to come here and buy property. And I think we're seeing that. And I predicted a fairly healthy first 6 months of the year in terms of property transactions with overseas buyers. And I can't see any reason, well, there are a few reasons, but I don't think we're going to see any difference to what I predicted.
So far, pretty much as planned.
Yeah, pretty much as planned. We've got clients coming again from all parts of the world, with one obvious exception. But yeah, a lot of people from the US, from Canada, obviously from Northern Europe. The Brits, the exchange rate has improved considerably over the last 12 months. So UK buyers are now able to exchange pounds into euros at a rate of almost 120, which tends to be a psychological kind of breakthrough point for a lot of our British buyers. That's when they decide to trade. So that's encouraged them back into the market if they were a little quiet towards the end of last year. So yeah, everything's kind of moving along very nicely. The interesting thing from talking to agents out in the field is the lack of stock. I mean, I was talking to an agent who is probably the leading agent in one of the very well-known golf resorts here. And he would normally, it has about 400, 500 apartments within the golf resort. It's very well regarded, very well known. So normally, in terms of his inventory, he would expect to have 10% of the stock available to sell. So between 40 and 50 apartments. And he has 2 on his books. So it's interesting how the supply is shrinking. A lot of the good stuff has been snapped up. So buyers are having to just be a little bit patient, but also the flip side to that is when they do see something they like, that they feel is fairly priced in the right area for them, they have to go for it, because it could be another year, 2 years until something comparable becomes available. And 2 years feels like a long time. And so if people want to have a holiday home in Spain, they kind of want it now or in the very near future. So my advice to people is be smart, but also if something comes along that looks good, to go for it, because you don't know how long you're going to be waiting.
Did you attend yesterday's launch of Knight Frank's The Wealth Report? And the reason I mentioned The Wealth Report is that it's probably the reference report in the sector, particularly in the high end, to do with what the wealthy have been doing, how they're behaving in terms of relation to real estate and investments. But also, more importantly, what their outlook is for the coming years is very well researched and generally pretty spot on. What were your takeaways from that?
I did, and you're right. It is one of the reference points that we do take notice of. They were pretty bang on, weren't they, in terms of their predictions last year? And it was interesting what they were saying this time around. How the COVID, the impact that's had, obviously the geopolitical issues at the moment in Eastern Europe, and interesting that they're predicting kind of more of the same. So the rich are getting richer, but they're also getting younger, which is interesting in terms of a demographic point of view. Also that a lot of people who are looking to invest, rather than just a lifestyle choice, but looking to invest, are looking for high income bearing assets to offset the effects of inflation. So it made a lot of sense. And I was also interested to learn that I think it was over 30, I can't remember the exact figure, it was between 30 and 40% of people they questioned, high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals who were looking to buy a property overseas. And I think by looking to, I think that, with serious intent, it's a lot of people. So yeah, it was encouraging to see that the wealth, they predicted that the wealth would be obviously shared around, but that a lot of the predominant second home destinations would feature in that and feature in the plans of the wealthy and ultra wealthy.
It'll be interesting to see how their outlook will be affected by what's happening. It's the elephant in the room, isn't it? What's happening at the moment in Ukraine and Russia with the Russians. And this isn't a political conversation. We're talking about real estate and we're talking about the market. So what do you think on the ground, what kind of effect would it have here in what's happening? What's your views on that?
Look at the numbers, the effect of, I don't think we're going to have any Russian buyers, because I think it's going to be impossible for Russian citizens to move their money about easily unless they have amazing structures, which probably only the oligarchs and their compatriots have access to. I think it's going to be very difficult for the ordinary Russian citizen to buy a property anywhere in the world outside of Russia, because they just can't move their money, or will find it very difficult to do so. But in terms of the effect it will have on the general market here, it's going to be negligible, because Russian buyers are a very, very small percentage of the buying market, the overseas buying market. I think in 2021, so last year, I think 10.8, so just under 11% of all property transactions involved foreigners buying. And of that figure, I think between 2 and 4% were to Russian buyers, which is, so when you actually boil that down, it's a very, very small number of buyers who are Russian. So I think it's probably going to affect the Russian agents who are predominantly after that market than people like us. We rarely handle Russian buyers or Russian sellers. They prefer to deal with their own. So it might well impact agents who predominantly handle Russian buyers and sellers. So for us, it's not something, obviously we're appalled, like most people, by what we're seeing and hearing, but I don't think it's going to affect our business. In fact, if anything, I think people will look upon southern Spain as a bit of a safe haven in terms of where it's politically based. We still get a lot of Polish clients. We've had a couple of Ukrainian clients in the past, although I'm not expecting much activity. They've got other things on their mind, for goodness sake. But we do get considerable interest from Eastern Europe. And obviously, if things get worse before they get better, then we may see a bit of a flight of people and money coming to a safe haven where people can invest and live safely.
Roughly 11% of all buyers of property in Spain last year were to foreigners, of which you say between 2 and 4% were to Russians. Do you have any figures for what the Ukrainian buying percentage?
I think it was around 1%. So even less.
Even smaller amounts.
Yeah. Okay. The Russian market has always, we've never really been exposed to it fully, because there are cultural differences in the way that we do business. They tend to deal with their own. And we've just never really been exposed to it. We've dealt with a couple of Russians in the 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And they were lovely and fine, and transactions were very, very comfortable. But it's not a market we tap into or seek to tap into. I know there are Russian agents here, a couple of which have a big presence, and I'll be interested to see how their business is affected. Not so much by whether the supply of Russian money is cut off so they don't get any Russian clients, but also whether other nations or nationalities want to do business with them purely because they're Russian. I don't know. They're all nice people, but without getting too political, but I'm going to. I think that the best way of stopping what's going on over there is for as much pressure as possible, both from inside Russia but also outside Russia, to be applied. And the more Russian people who stand up for democracy, then I think the more chance we have of Putin bringing this to an end. So, I would invite any Russian agent here who hasn't raised their head above the parapet and expressed a view to do so. We were very close. I was on a call to our PR company last week we were very close to actually just saying that we weren't going to be dealing with any Russian buyers or sellers, full stop, while this was going on. No other agent has bothered to make that claim, but I felt that it was a little bit of what we could possibly do. Not that anyone would really notice, but at least we're doing our bit, and I would have expected the Russian agents here to be doing something similar, at least to be saying something anyway.